A little girl was walking alone through the snow to the hospital, until a billionaire stopped beside her, and discovered a truth that shattered his world. Snow blanketed the narrow country road so thickly that each step left a fragile footprint quickly swallowed by the wind. The little girl in the red dress pushed forward anyway, hugging her thin arms around herself as if she could keep the cold from sinking into her bones. Her blonde hair, tangled and stiff with frost, clung to her cheeks, and her blue eyes, usually bright, were now dull with worry and exhaustion. She walked with the stubborn determination of someone far older than 6, whispering quiet encouragements to herself in a trembling voice as if the words alone could keep her going. "I'm going to see my mom. I'm going to see Mom." The world around her was silent except for the wind, and the crunch of her shoes on the snow filled the emptiness like a fragile heartbeat. She didn't see the car until its headlights cut through the swirling snow, illuminating her small figure like a lost lantern on the white road. The sleek black vehicle slowed instantly, its tires hissing over ice before coming to a full stop. The backlight washed over her like a spotlight, and for a second she froze, unsure whether to run or stay still. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a man whose presence changed the air around him. Tall, broad-shouldered, elegant even in the harsh snowstorm, he wore a perfectly tailored blue suit that contrasted sharply with the winter landscape. Dark hair, tousled by the wind, framed a face both striking and stern, with eyes an icy shade of blue that missed nothing. He looked like someone who belonged in a boardroom, not on a deserted roadside. Yet he crossed the snow toward her with quick, purposeful steps, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "Where are your parents?" he asked, voice deep and firm but softened by genuine concern as he noticed how violently she was shivering. The question seemed too heavy for her small frame, and for a moment she simply stared at him, her teeth chattering, her lips turning pale. He didn't wait for her to answer before unbuttoning his coat and draping it around her shoulders, the heavy warmth swallowing her tiny figure. She looked even smaller inside it, like a fragile bird trembling beneath a blanket. She swallowed hard before finally speaking. "My mom, she's in the hospital." The words barely escaped her, a thin whisper pulled from a breaking heart. Something behind his eyes flickered, shock, then something deeper, something almost painful, as if her words struck a place he had buried long ago. He crouched to her level, gently brushing snow from her hair, and asked her name with a calmness he didn't feel. "Lily," she murmured. He led her to the warm car with a care that surprised even him. When he helped her into the seat and buckled her in, he noticed how she clenched the coat with desperate little hands, as if afraid he might take it away. He turned the heater to full, letting the warmth wrap around her, and drove toward the hospital with a speed just short of reckless. She stared out the window, her breath fogging the glass, her eyes reflecting a mixture of fear, exhaustion, and hope. When they arrived, he carried her inside, ignoring the startled looks of nurses and patients. It was only when he approached the reception desk that Lily tugged on his sleeve and pointed to a familiar door down the hall. He walked with her toward it, feeling an inexplicable tension tighten in his chest. The closer he came, the louder his heartbeat rang in his ears, as if his instinct recognized something before his mind did. Then he saw the name on the door. Ava Miller. Everything inside him stopped. His breath. His thoughts. His certainty. That name was a ghost, one he had tried to bury for 5 years. The woman he once loved. The woman who vanished without warning. The woman whose disappearance carved a wound he never truly recovered from. He turned slowly toward Lily, the truth dawning with terrifying clarity. The shape of her eyes. The golden hair. The small tilt of her chin. She looked exactly like Ava. She looked exactly like him. His world shifted beneath his feet, slow and devastating. Lily tugged his hand again, her voice a fragile thread. "Can I see my mom now?" Jason Harper, the billionaire feared in boardrooms across the country, the man known for control and unbreakable composure, felt his throat tighten with a rawness he hadn't felt in years. He pushed open the door with shaking hands, bracing himself. And there she was. Ava. Still, pale, connected to machines, trapped inside a world she couldn't wake from. Lily pressed her hand to the glass, whispering, "Mama." Jason stared at the woman he once believed he would marry. At the daughter he hadn't known he had. At the life he lost, and the one he suddenly, desperately wanted back. In that moment, the snow outside seemed to stop. The world narrowed to a hospital room, a sleeping woman, and a trembling child who looked up at him with innocent eyes and unknowingly shattered his universe. Nothing would ever be the same again. Jason stood frozen outside Ava's room, the world spinning strangely around him as if the white, sterile hallway had tilted under his feet. He tried to breathe normally, to force his mind to make sense of what he was seeing, but every breath felt thin, as if the air no longer belonged to him. Through the glass pane, the steady rise and fall of Ava's chest under the hospital sheets haunted him. She looked so still, so breakable, nothing like the bright, fierce woman who once challenged him, loved him, and then vanished from his life without a single explanation. His heart thundered with the unbearable weight of realization. Lily was not just a stranger's child. She was his child. His daughter. The years he had spent imagining what kind of man he would be as a father now twisted into a crushing ache because he hadn't been there at all. Lily tugged gently on his sleeve, not understanding the storm inside him. Her small fingers, red from the cold and fear, wrapped around his hand, anchoring him to the moment. She leaned against his side, eyes fixed on her mother through the window. For a few seconds, he simply looked at her, really looked, and every detail seemed to echo Ava and himself in ways he had never noticed earlier. The familiar shape of her eyebrows. The way her mouth tightened when she was trying not to cry. The quiet resilience in her posture. It was all there, a reflection of a past he had lost and a future he didn't know how to begin. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. "Lily, how long has your mother been here?" "Since last week," she whispered. "The doctors said she got hurt really bad." Her voice quivered, but she stood straighter as she spoke, trying to be strong. "She was driving home, and someone crashed into her car. They said it was an accident, but I don't know. I don't know anything." Jason felt a dark pulse of anger stir inside him, quiet but sharp. He stepped closer to the door, as though proximity would give him answers. Ava's face, even in unconsciousness, carried the hints of pain, a bruise along her temple, a faint cut on her lip. It was wrong. It was all wrong. It didn't feel like coincidence. Not after everything in the letter he had found. Not after the threats she wrote about. Someone had wanted her gone. Someone had made sure she disappeared 5 years ago, and maybe someone was still trying. A nurse approached them, gently touching Lily's shoulder. "Sweetheart, visiting hours are ending soon," she said softly. Then she glanced at Jason, recognizing wealth and authority instantly, though she had no idea who he truly was. "Are you a relative?" Jason hesitated. The truth lodged in his throat. Saying it aloud felt terrifying and sacred. I don't know how to answer that yet," he finally said, and the nurse gave him a puzzled look before nodding and walking away. Lily's eyes were full of quiet questions, but before she could ask them, Jason knelt to her height, forcing himself to hold her gaze instead of turning away. "Are you here alone?" he asked. She shook her head. "A neighbor brought me the first day. But she had to work today, so I walked." She hesitated, voice barely audible. "The nurse said I shouldn't be here alone, but I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't stay home." Jason ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he hadn't done in years. The idea of Lily walking alone in the snow made his stomach twist. "Do you have anywhere else to go? Anyone who can take care of you?" Lily hesitated again. "Just Mom," she murmured. He closed his eyes for a moment as the truth settled over him like a heavy cloak. Ava had been fighting alone. For years. And Lily had been growing up without a father because Ava had believed disappearance was the only way to protect her. The injustice of it pressed down on him like a physical weight. He opened his eyes and looked at Lily again, seeing her not as a stranger's child, but as someone whose existence tied him irrevocably to this moment. He stood and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Let's talk somewhere warm." In the hospital's small waiting room, he bought Lily hot chocolate from a vending machine. She cupped it with both hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers. Jason sat across from her, studying her carefully, trying to find a way to voice the truth without frightening her. She glanced up timidly. "Did you know my mommy?" He swallowed hard. "Yes," he said. "A long time ago." Her eyes widened. "Were you friends?" His answer came slowly, heavy with memories. "We were, much more than friends." He waited, but she didn't understand what he meant. How could she? She was 6. She chewed her lip nervously, then whispered the question he had been dreading and longing for at the same time. "Do you know who my daddy is?" He felt his heart drop, felt the moment crystallize around him like glass. He leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "Lily. I'm not completely sure yet. But I think, it might be me." The little girl froze, her breath catching as if the air around her had turned to snow crystals. Her eyes searched his face, desperate and startled, looking for any sign that he was joking or confused. But Jason held her gaze, letting her see the raw truth in his expression. Her lower lip trembled. "Really?" she whispered. Jason nodded. Lily pushed aside the cup, climbed off the chair, and took a shaky step toward him. She looked like she might run away, or collapse. Instead she leaned forward and wrapped her arms around his neck with all the fragile strength she had, pressing her face into his shoulder. He felt her tiny heartbeat against his chest, a rhythm he hadn't known he was missing. "I knew you were a good person," she whispered, as if making a secret confession. "Mom always said my daddy was good." Jason closed his eyes, one hand covering the back of her head as he struggled to steady his breath. He hadn't cried in over a decade, but something wet stung at the corners of his eyes now. He held her until she finally relaxed, still trembling. And for the first time since he saw Ava's name on the door, the chaos in his mind eased just enough for a single, powerful thought to form. He was not leaving either of them ever again. Jason didn't sleep that night. Even hours after he left the hospital, his mind churned relentlessly as he paced across his penthouse, unable to sit still. The city lights glittered beneath him, reflected in the tall windows like a world removed from everything he had just experienced. His home, quiet, pristine, expensive, felt unbearably empty now that he knew Lily existed, now that he had held her trembling form against him. The echo of her small voice kept replaying in his head, "Mom always said my daddy was good." He hadn't been there. He hadn't even known. The pain of that truth was sharp, almost punishing, and it drove him into a state he didn't recognize. The man who always had a plan now found himself drowning in questions that felt too heavy to carry. He finally forced himself to sit, pulling the old letter from his pocket, the letter Ava wrote and never sent. He unfolded it slowly, letting his eyes trace her handwriting, smooth and familiar in a way that brought a lump to his throat. She had written about her fear, about receiving threats from people who wanted access to him, about how they warned her that being close to him put her at risk. She had written about the baby, about wanting to tell him, about not knowing how. And the final lines were what shattered him, "If leaving keeps her safe, then I will disappear. I only pray you someday understand." He pressed his palms to his face, overwhelmed by guilt and helplessness. Ava had been terrified, alone, pregnant with his child, and she vanished because she believed it was the only way to keep their daughter alive. The next morning, long before dawn broke, he was back in his car, heading straight for the hospital. As he walked through the quiet corridor, he found Lily curled in a chair beside Ava's door, wrapped in his coat, her small body tucked into itself like she was trying to stay warm. She had barely slept. He approached quietly and knelt beside her. "You're here," she whispered, as if afraid he wouldn't come. "Of course I am," he said gently. "Did you sleep at all?" "A little," she lied, her eyes too tired to hide the truth. He lifted her into his arms so she wouldn't have to walk, carrying her to the waiting room where he bought her a warm breakfast. She ate slowly, glancing at him every few seconds as if to make sure he hadn't vanished. Jason watched her with a heaviness in his heart, realizing just how fragile her world had become. No child should have to spend nights in hospital corridors. No child should stand alone in the snow trying to reach her mother. He made a silent promise to himself that such a thing would never happen again. After breakfast, Lily asked to see her mother, so he walked with her to Ava's bedside. Inside the room, the machines hummed their steady rhythm, and Ava lay motionless beneath the blankets. Lily carefully climbed onto the chair and slipped her hand into her mother's, her small fingers curling around Ava's pale ones. Jason stood behind her, unable to tear his gaze away from the woman he had once imagined building a life with. She looked fragile in a way that frightened him. He remembered her laughter, her stubbornness, her fire. She had been unstoppable once. Now she lay silent, caught between worlds. Lily began talking softly to Ava, telling her about the snow, about school, about the hot chocolate Jason had bought her. She spoke as if her mother could hear every word, and maybe she did, Jason didn't know. But he saw something break inside himself as he watched them. The two people he should have protected most had been fighting alone for years, and now he was the only one who could stand between them and the world that had failed them. When Lily grew tired, Jason guided her out of the room. The hallway felt colder now, as though the air carried the weight of everything unsaid. He found a seat at the end of the corridor and sat with Lily beside him, her head resting against his arm. The silence stretched between them until she finally asked, in the smallest voice he had ever heard, "If you're my dad, then, what happens now?" Jason looked down at her, at the anxiety flickering behind her innocent eyes. She wasn't asking out of curiosity. She was asking out of fear, fear of being left again. He took a slow, steady breath. "What happens now," he began carefully, "is that I take care of you. And your mom. I don't know exactly how yet, but I promise you, I'm not going anywhere." She blinked up at him with a soft, hopeful expression. "You mean I get to have a dad now?" His chest tightened painfully. "Yes," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You do." She wrapped her arms around him again, pressing her cheek against his chest, and he held her as though she were a piece of his heart he had only just discovered. In that moment, all doubts vanished. The fear, the guilt, the unanswered questions, they all quieted beneath a single, profound certainty: Lily belonged with him, and he would never let her slip away. Later, when Jason stepped outside to take a call, he dialed his private investigator without hesitation. His voice was cold, controlled, but charged with new purpose. "I need information," he said. "About Ava Miller's accident. About everything that happened 5 years ago. And I want names." He hung up and returned to the hallway, where Lily was drawing on a visitor's clipboard with a borrowed pen, sketching a picture of 3 people holding hands. Him. Ava. Herself. The drawing was simple, but something about it struck him deeply, like a glimpse of a life that might have been, and could still be. He sat down beside her, watching her small hand glide across the paper. "Do you like drawing?" he asked. She nodded. "Mom says drawing helps you feel less alone." Jason swallowed hard, unable to speak for a moment. He reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. "You're not alone anymore," he said softly, unsure whether he was reassuring her or himself. And for the first time since Ava vanished from his life, Jason felt something he had forgotten how to feel. Hope. Jason returned to the hospital early the next morning with the uneasy sense that the fragile balance he had found the day before could collapse at any moment. The hallway lights flickered faintly as he stepped inside, the antiseptic smell instantly pulling him back into the reality he wished he could change. Lily was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the chair near Ava's room with her hair slightly messy and his oversized coat still wrapped around her, as if she believed removing it would make him disappear. When she saw him, her entire face softened with relief, and that simple expression nearly shattered him again. She shouldn't have needed to feel relieved that someone came back. A child her age should assume the adults in her life always would. He greeted her quietly and carried her down the hall for breakfast, letting her cling to his shoulder with the sleepy vulnerability she tried so hard to hide. Afterward, they returned to Ava's room, but a nurse intercepted them at the door to give Jason an update. Ava's condition was stable, but not improving. The coma showed no signs of lifting, and the doctors could not predict how long she would remain in that state. Lily didn't say anything during the conversation, but her hand tightened around Jason's fingers until her knuckles turned white. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders and pulled her closer, offering comfort he didn't fully know how to give. Inside the room, Lily climbed onto the chair beside Ava again, gently curling her fingers around her mother's hand as if hoping her touch alone could bring Ava back. Jason watched quietly from the corner, the sight of the fragile little girl beside the unconscious woman filling him with a mixture of grief and fierce protectiveness. The machines hummed steadily, breaking the silence in soft, rhythmic intervals that felt both reassuring and cruel. He moved to Ava's other side and studied her face carefully, taking in every detail, the faint bruises, the healing cuts, the stillness that felt unnatural for someone who once lived with so much intensity. He wanted to speak to her but didn't know where to begin. His silence felt heavy, loaded with years of regret. Eventually Lily's voice filled the room. She began telling her mother about the snow outside, about how she drew a picture of all three of them, about how Jason bought her breakfast again because he said dads are supposed to do that. Jason froze when she said that, glancing toward the door in case someone overheard, but Lily continued speaking as if stating a simple truth rather than something that had just turned his life upside down. When she finished her story, she rested her head on the side of the bed and closed her eyes as if trying to feel closer to Ava through the steady rhythm of the machines. Jason stepped out of the room once she drifted into a half-sleep, needing air, space, clarity, anything that could stop the whirlwind inside him. He leaned against the cold wall in the hallway and pinched the bridge of his nose, his mind spiraling back to the threats Ava had mentioned in her letter. He had spent years refusing to consider that someone might use him to hurt the people he cared about. He had always believed he could protect those around him simply by being powerful, by being Jason Harper, by controlling every variable. Yet here he was, standing outside the room of the woman he loved and the daughter he never knew existed, both of whom had been forced into danger because he hadn't seen the shadows creeping into his life. His phone buzzed. It was his private investigator. The conversation was short, but the information hit him with the force of a blow. Ava's disappearance 5 years ago aligned almost exactly with a series of threats made to her by an unknown party connected to a business rival, someone who had recently reappeared, trying to negotiate an acquisition with Jason through back channels. The investigator also confirmed that the car accident that put Ava in a coma was suspicious. The skid marks didn't match her driving path. The damage to her car suggested an intentional push, not a random collision. Someone wanted her gone again. And this time, they nearly succeeded. Jason's jaw tightened as the pieces began to form a pattern he wished he didn't recognize. Someone had tried to silence Ava. Someone who feared she might reveal something. Someone who knew she had been connected to him. He returned to Ava's room with renewed determination, but the moment he stepped inside, Lily woke with a small start and rubbed her eyes. She reached for him instinctively, as if his presence alone steadied her. He lifted her onto his lap and explained gently that he needed to speak with the doctor. She asked if he'd come back. He assured her he would, something he realized he would probably repeat hundreds of times until she finally believed it. After meeting with the doctor, who confirmed that Ava's coma showed no signs of reversing on its own, Jason walked Lily outside to get some fresh air. The hospital garden was covered in snow, its benches icy and its trees glowing faintly beneath the soft light strung across their branches. Lily held his hand tightly as they walked, her breath forming small white clouds in the cold. She didn't talk much, as if the fear of losing her mother was growing heavier with every hour that passed. Finally she asked the question that had been building inside her. If she doesn't wake up, what happens to me? Her voice cracked, barely more than a whisper, but the fear in it was unmistakable. Jason stopped walking and knelt in front of her, taking both of her hands in his. "You stay with me," he said with quiet certainty that left no room for doubt. "No matter what happens. I don't care what anyone says or what the law says or what has happened before. You're my daughter, Lily. And I won't let anything happen to you." The relief on her face was immediate, almost heartbreaking. She threw her arms around him again, and he held her for a long time, feeling the weight of the moment settle deep into his bones. For the first time in days, Lily smiled, small, soft, but real. And Jason realized that protecting her was no longer a choice or a responsibility. It was instinct. It was something woven into him so naturally it felt like it had always been there. They returned to the hospital, and Jason watched Lily resume her vigil beside Ava's bed. She held her mother's hand again, whispering stories and hopes and small secrets. He watched them both and understood that his life had changed forever. He would fight for Ava. He would protect Lily. And he would uncover the truth behind everything that happened, no matter how dangerous it became. Because losing them again was not an option. Jason spent the next several days in a strange rhythm that felt both unbearably heavy and strangely grounding. Mornings began with him arriving at the hospital before sunrise, often finding Lily already awake and sitting beside Ava's bed, her small figure curled like a fragile guardian refusing to abandon her post. He brought breakfast, warm clothes, coloring books, anything to make the cold, sterile hospital room feel a little less like an island of fear. Lily accepted everything with quiet gratitude, but her eyes always drifted back to her mother, as if willing her to awaken through sheer devotion. Jason watched her closely, memorizing the way she smoothed Ava's blanket, the way she whispered stories, the way she clutched Ava's fingers as though she believed she could pull her back into the world 1 inch at a time. It broke him and strengthened him all at once. While Lily stayed with the nurses for short stretches, Jason turned his focus to uncovering the truth. His private investigator sent updates daily, small pieces of a puzzle that painted a darker picture with each new fragment. Security footage from the road where Ava's accident happened showed another car trailing her suspiciously close. Witnesses reported hearing a bang before the crash, something sharp and aggressive, not the typical result of icy roads. Jason's rival, the man who had been trying to push his way into Harper Industries through underhanded deals, had recently hired a private consultant with a history of making problems disappear. The deeper Jason dug, the clearer it became that Ava's accident wasn't an accident at all. Someone had pushed her car. Someone had wanted to silence her before she could reveal anything about the threats she received years ago. The knowledge sent a slow-burning fury through him, something cold and controlled, the kind of rage that demanded justice rather than chaos. But he couldn't act on that anger yet, not while Ava remained on the edge of life and Lily needed him. His priority was here, in this room, where a little girl fought sleep only to whisper, "Mama, please wake up," into the stillness. Sometimes Lily curled up next to him in the chair when exhaustion finally overtook her, her small head resting against his side. Jason would gently place a blanket around her and then resume his vigil, watching over both of them with a level of protectiveness he hadn't known he possessed. One afternoon, during one of those long stretches of silence, Jason reached for Ava's hand. It felt cold, lighter than he remembered, and yet the familiarity of her skin nearly crushed him. He leaned closer, studying her face, trying to reconcile this fragile, unmoving body with the fiery woman who once argued with him for hours, laughed with him in crowded restaurants, whispered dreams to him in late-night conversations. He spoke to her quietly, not sure whether any of it reached her, but needing to speak it all the same. He told her about Lily's strength, her stubborn bravery, her kindness. He told her about the letter he found, how he finally understood why she disappeared, how he wished she had trusted him enough to tell him the truth. His voice trembled as he admitted that he never stopped caring for her, that losing her had been the greatest regret of his life. Lily returned to the room halfway through his confession, silently approaching as she always did when she sensed he was emotional. She climbed into the chair beside him and rested her head against his shoulder. Jason wrapped an arm around her automatically, grateful for her presence even as it tore his heart open further. She didn't ask what he had said or why he looked as if he'd been fighting ghosts. She simply sat with him, understanding instinctively that he needed quiet, too. That evening, Jason took Lily outside for a short break. The hospital courtyard was dusted with snow, the benches icy and untouched. Lily held his hand as they walked slowly along the path, her breath forming small clouds in the air. She stopped suddenly and looked up at him. "Do you think Mama can hear me when I talk to her?" she asked. The question pierced him in a way he didn't expect. He knelt down so they were eye level. "I think she hears every word," he said firmly. "I think she's fighting as hard as she can to come back to you." Lily's eyes shimmered. "I'm scared she won't. Sometimes when I'm sleeping, I dream that she's calling me but I can't reach her." Jason placed both hands on her shoulders, his voice steady and gentle. "Listen to me, Lily. No matter what happens, you're not going to be alone. I'm here now. And I'm not leaving. Your mother would want you safe, loved, and protected, and I promise you that's what you'll have." She threw her arms around him, her small body trembling. He hugged her tightly, feeling something shift in his chest, a resolve, a certainty, a purpose. He wasn't just stepping into Lily's life. He was stepping into the life he should have had years ago, the life Ava never got to share with him. When they returned inside, Lily resumed her place beside Ava, but Jason didn't go back to his corner. Instead he dragged a chair closer to the bed and placed his hand over Ava's once more. Lily looked at him curiously, but he didn't explain. He didn't need to. He simply sat with them, united in silence, letting the steady rhythm of the machines weave them into a fragile, temporary family. For the first time, he understood that he didn't just want Ava to wake up. He needed her to. For Lily. For himself. For the future he didn't know he still wanted. And as snow fell softly against the window, Jason made a quiet vow he didn't dare speak aloud. Whoever had done this to her, whoever had taken 5 years from them, would pay dearly. But first, he would bring her home. Jason woke the next morning with a stiffness in his back and the sterile scent of disinfectant heavy in his lungs. He had fallen asleep sitting upright beside Ava's bed, one hand resting loosely near hers and the other draped protectively around Lily, who had crawled into his lap sometime during the night. For a moment he didn't move, listening to the dull hum of machines and feeling the delicate rise and fall of Lily's breathing against him. It struck him then, how quietly a life could reshape itself. Just days ago, he had been alone in a penthouse too large for one man. Now he woke with a daughter curled into him and the woman he once loved lying unconscious inches away. He looked at Lily's small face, softened by sleep, and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. She stirred slightly but didn't wake, leaning into him instinctively like she already trusted him to be there when she opened her eyes. When Lily finally woke, she blinked slowly, as if adjusting to the weight of morning sadness. She stretched and whispered, "Hi," in a voice still warm from sleep. Jason managed a small smile, even though he felt a knot tightening inside his chest. She immediately looked past him to Ava and reached out to touch her mother's arm. "Mama, it's morning," she said softly, as if the words alone might coax her awake. Jason rested a reassuring hand on her back, but inside he felt the crushing ache of helplessness return. Each silent morning, each unchanged day, was another reminder that Ava's fate hung by a thread none of them could control. He encouraged Lily to eat something, walking with her to the cafeteria where she picked nervously at a muffin. She talked about school, about the snow, about a dream she had where Ava woke up smiling. Her innocence filled the space between them, but beneath every word was fear, fear she was trying desperately to hide. Jason listened intently, offering warmth and steady reassurance, wondering how someone so small could carry so much weight on her shoulders. After breakfast, Lily insisted on returning to Ava immediately, and Jason let her lead him back to the room where she resumed her quiet vigil, whispering to her mother as though conversation alone could bridge the distance between them. Jason stepped out into the hallway to make calls, but unlike before, the purpose behind his actions was sharpened by certainty. He was no longer trying to gather information, he was preparing to confront the truth. His private investigator sent a new report, this time with more explicit details. The rival businessmen who had been circling Harper Industries with predatory interest had a long history of hiring people to solve problems discreetly. One of those men, a former security contractor with ties to Ava's workplace 5 years ago, had recently been spotted near the road where her accident occurred. Jason felt a chill settle through him that had nothing to do with the hospital's temperature. It was becoming undeniable, Ava's disappearance, her reappearance, and her accident were all entangled with a man who viewed Jason as an obstacle, a threat, perhaps even a target. By midday, Jason returned to Ava's side with determination etched into his expression. He sat close, folding his hands together as he watched Lily trace circles on Ava's wrist with her thumb. Lily looked up at him with a question in her eyes, a question she wasn't ready to speak yet. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Your mom is strong," he said. "She's fighting. And so am I. I'm not letting anything happen to her or to you." Lily studied him for a long moment, her blue eyes full of a wisdom too old for her years. She then rested her head against his arm and whispered, "I'm glad you found us." That single sentence cracked something open inside him, something raw, something long buried. He placed a gentle hand atop her hair, feeling her relax against him. Later that evening, Jason received a call from one of the top neurologists he'd hired. The specialist had reviewed Ava's files and scans and offered a new option, a risky but potentially life-saving procedure that could increase her chance of waking from the coma. It wasn't guaranteed. In fact, the odds were still low. But it was the first glimmer of hope stronger than mere waiting. Jason returned to the room with the information, but he didn't share it with Lily right away. Instead, he watched the little girl color drawings at the bedside, each picture depicting her family reunited, Ava holding her hand, Jason standing beside them, snowflakes drifting gently in the background. Every drawing felt like a plea, a wish, a small prayer made visible. When Lily was finally asleep on the small couch beneath a blanket, Jason sat beside Ava alone. He looked at her, really looked, and felt a rush of memories flood him. The nights they spent talking until sunrise, the way she used to look at him like she wanted to memorize him, the day she disappeared without a trace. He raised her hand to his lips, letting the contact linger, letting the emotion he tried so hard to suppress finally rise to the surface. "Ava," he whispered, voice low and steady, "I need you to come back. Not just for Lily, but for us. I should have found you sooner. I should have protected you. I'm not letting anyone hurt you again." He sat like that for a long time, holding her hand, willing her to feel his presence. The room was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of the monitors, a steady reminder that she was still here, still fighting. When he finally stood, he made a vow to himself, he would proceed with the specialist's recommendation. He would give Ava the chance she deserved, the chance life had stolen from her. And he would face whoever had tried to take her away, no matter how dangerous they were. That night, as he settled into the chair beside Lily, he looked at both of them and finally understood the truth he had been resisting. This was no longer about guilt or obligation or even lost time. This was about family, one fractured by fear and silence, but still real, still worth fighting for. He reached out, brushing his fingers gently across Ava's hand, and whispered again, "Come back to us." In the quiet darkness of the hospital room, filled with soft machine hums and the faint glow of monitors, Jason made one final promise to the woman he loved and the daughter he'd just found: he would not lose them again. Jason spent the next 2 days preparing for the meeting with the specialist, though the word "preparing" didn't capture the storm inside him. It wasn't simply a medical decision, it was the collision of hope and terror, a crossroads where one path promised a chance at life and the other threatened the quiet, devastating possibility of losing Ava forever. He read through every report, every side effect, every statistic, trying to steady himself against the weight of uncertainty. But no amount of logic could mute the emotional truth. He couldn't imagine a world where Ava didn't wake up. He couldn't imagine Lily growing up without the mother she adored, and he couldn't imagine living with the guilt of choosing too late. When the specialist finally arrived, a calm, steady woman with years of experience behind her eyes, Jason listened with tension in every muscle. She explained the procedure in full, emphasizing both its potential and its risks. Lily sat beside him, clutching his hand with a silent, trembling fear that made the choice feel even heavier. After the consultation, Jason asked Lily to wait in the hall for a few minutes. He needed to speak with the doctor alone, needed to hear the unfiltered truth without the weight of Lily's gaze tightening around him. The doctor didn't sugarcoat anything. The chances of waking Ava remained uncertain. The procedure could help, but it could also fail, leaving Ava unchanged or worse. Jason felt something inside him clench painfully at the thought, but he faced the doctor with a rare vulnerability, admitting that he couldn't lose Ava again. The doctor placed a gentle hand on his arm and told him what he already knew yet needed to hear: sometimes, love required courage greater than fear. When Jason returned to Lily, she stood from the chair as if bracing for bad news. He knelt so they were eye level, searching for a way to explain the complexity of the situation without overwhelming her. Lily looked at him, her eyes enormous and glistening with anxiety. "Is Mama getting better?" she asked, voice barely audible. He exhaled, steadying himself. "There's a way we can help her," he said slowly, "but it's not easy. The doctors think they can wake her, but there's a risk. I want to do everything we can to bring her back, but I need to know how you feel." Lily didn't answer immediately. Instead she turned toward the window, staring at the snow outside as if searching for courage in its quiet fall. Her shoulders were small, but the way she stood made her seem like someone carrying the weight of the entire world. Finally she spoke, her voice fragile but firm. "If there's even a little chance she'll wake up, then we have to try. Mama would try for me." Jason swallowed hard, feeling a swell of pride and heartbreak. Her bravery shook him. She looked up at him again. "Will you be with her during it?" He nodded without hesitation. "Every second." The decision was made. The paperwork was signed. The surgery was scheduled for the next morning. That night became one of the longest of Jason's life. Lily refused to sleep without knowing he was close, so he stayed with her in the small room the nurses had prepared for her. She eventually drifted off, curled against his side. Jason lay awake for hours, listening to her soft breathing, staring at the ceiling while battling a storm of guilt, fear, and hope. Every thought circled back to Ava, her laugh, her stubbornness, her warmth, the 5 years stolen from them. He closed his eyes and let memories wash over him, remembering the last time he held her, the last time she looked at him with a mixture of affection and bravery that always made him feel seen. He whispered into the darkness, "Come back to me. Come back to us." Morning arrived with a jolt. Nurses moved with quiet urgency as the hospital prepared the operating room. Jason dressed Lily warmly and held her small hand as they walked down the hallway. She clutched a drawing she had made, a picture of their small family holding hands under falling snow. She held it tightly as if it were a shield against the fear growing inside her. When they reached Ava's room, Lily placed the picture carefully on her mother's chest and kissed her cheek. "Come home to me, Mama," she whispered, her voice breaking. Jason's throat tightened as he lifted Lily into his arms, carrying her out while the nurses wheeled Ava away. In the waiting room, time stretched unbearably. Every minute felt like an hour. Jason paced back and forth, unable to sit, unable to think of anything except the fragile line separating hope from despair. Lily sat in a chair, hugging her knees to her chest, her eyes never leaving the hallway where her mother had disappeared. Sometimes she whispered prayers under her breath, sometimes she simply watched the floor as though afraid to look up. Jason wanted to reassure her, but the storm inside him was too intense, too raw. He didn't know how to lie to her, didn't know how to offer a promise he wasn't certain he could keep. Instead he sat beside her, wrapped an arm around her shoulders, and held her close. That quiet connection became their strength. Hours passed. Nurses came and went. The doctor remained in the operating room. Each new moment felt sharper, heavier, pressed with the breathless anticipation that something irreversible was unfolding behind those doors. Lily leaned against Jason, exhausted from fear. She eventually rested her head in his lap, and he stroked her hair gently, silently promising that he would protect her no matter the outcome. He glanced toward the clock repeatedly, listening for footsteps, for voices, for anything that might mean the operation was over. Just before sunset, the specialist finally stepped into the waiting room. Jason stood instantly, heart hammering. Lily woke with a small gasp, her eyes wide with terror. The doctor approached them slowly, her expression calm but unreadable, and in the silence that followed, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then the doctor spoke. The procedure was completed. Ava's condition was stable. There had been complications, but Ava had responded better than expected. There was still no guarantee, but the signs were promising. The next 24 hours would be crucial. Jason's knees nearly gave out from the relief that flooded him, and Lily burst into tears, clinging to him so tightly he could barely breathe. Hope, for the first time in days, felt real. Not a distant dream. Not a fragile wish. But something solid, fragile yet reachable. Jason held Lily close and whispered, "She's fighting. She's still fighting." And he knew, with fierce certainty, that he would fight right beside her until the very end. The night after the procedure felt impossibly long, as if time refused to move until it knew whether Ava would return to the world or slip further away. Jason didn't leave her bedside, not even for a moment. Lily lay curled beside him on a small cot the nurses had brought in, her face pressed into his arm as she drifted in and out of restless sleep. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of monitors and the soft winter light filtering through the window. Jason watched every rise and fall of Ava's chest with desperate intensity, counting each breath as though memorizing the pattern could keep her tethered to them. The doctor had warned him not to expect miracles overnight, yet hope fluttered inside him with every small sign of stability, clinging stubbornly to the possibility that Ava might choose to come back. In the early hours of morning, when the world outside was still silent and heavy with untouched snow, Jason felt Ava's fingers twitch beneath his hand. At first he thought he imagined it, a wishful illusion conjured from exhaustion. But then it happened again, small, weak, but undeniably real. He sat up straighter, his breath catching, and leaned closer to her. "Ava," he whispered, afraid to speak too loudly, afraid even air might shatter the fragile moment. Her eyelashes trembled faintly, her eyebrows shifting ever so slightly as if she were trying to surface from a deep, endless sleep. Jason reached forward, gently brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "Ava, it's me. I'm here. Lily's here. You're safe." Lily stirred at the sound of his voice, lifting her head groggily. When she saw Ava's fingers moving, she jolted fully awake, scrambling off the cot and pressing both her hands onto her mother's arm. "Mama," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear and hope tangled together. Ava's eyelids fluttered again, then slowly, achingly slowly, opened. Her eyes were unfocused at first, drifting without recognition. Jason felt his heart hammer in his chest, the world narrowing to the faint light returning to her gaze. Lily leaned closer, tears already falling. "Mama, please look at me." Ava blinked again, her vision sharpening as she turned her head slightly toward the sound of Lily's voice. When her eyes finally met her daughter's, a faint spark lit within them, the faintest flicker of recognition. "Lily." She breathed, the word barely audible but filled with a fragile warmth that broke whatever remained of Jason's composure. Lily burst into sobs and threw herself gently against her mother's shoulder, careful not to disturb the medical lines. Ava's hand weakly moved to rest atop her daughter's back, her fingers trembling as they curled protectively around the child she had fought so hard to keep safe. Jason stepped closer, unable to stop the tears burning in his eyes. He hadn't cried since he was a child, but the sight of Ava alive, awake, touching their daughter with the tenderness he remembered so vividly, shattered every wall he'd built. Ava turned her head to look at him, her gaze softening with slow comprehension. "Jason." She whispered, the name catching in her throat as if it belonged to a distant memory that had suddenly awakened. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, as though afraid she might slip away again if he held too tight. "I'm here," he said quietly. "I never should have left you alone. I'm here now. And I'm not going anywhere." Ava closed her eyes briefly, tears slipping down her temples. When she opened them again, she seemed clearer, more present, though still weak. She looked from Jason to Lily, her breathing growing unsteady as emotions overwhelmed her. "I wanted to tell you," she murmured. "I wanted to come back. I was scared. I didn't know how to keep her safe." Jason shook his head, brushing his thumb over her hand. "You don't have to explain now. All that matters is that you're here. We'll figure everything out together." Lily held on to Ava as if afraid she might disappear again, whispering words of comfort through her tears. Ava stroked her daughter's hair with slow, trembling movements, anchoring herself back to reality with every touch. The doctor soon arrived and confirmed the miracle that Jason and Lily were already living. Ava was waking, responding, stabilizing. The coming days would be difficult, physical therapy, monitoring, slow healing, but she was back, alive, capable of recovery. Jason felt as if the world had opened up again, a world he had feared was closing forever. He thanked the doctor, his voice unsteady, and then returned to Ava's side the moment they stepped out. That afternoon, Ava was transferred to a private recovery room filled with warm light and enough space for Jason and Lily to stay comfortably. Lily insisted on sitting beside the bed, her hand in Ava's, her gaze filled with fierce devotion. Jason remained close, adjusting pillows, speaking softly, whispering small reassurances whenever Ava seemed overwhelmed. At one point, Ava looked at him, her voice barely more than a breath. "You found her," she said, tears shining in her eyes. "You found our daughter." Jason leaned closer, resting his forehead gently against hers. "She found me," he whispered. "And she brought me back to you." Days passed, and Ava grew stronger, her voice steadier, her movements more controlled. She and Lily talked for hours, soft conversations filled with relief and longing. Jason joined them often, though sometimes he simply watched them, still stunned by the reality that fate had given them a second chance. When Ava learned about the attempt on her life and the danger she had escaped, fear flickered across her face, but it quickly gave way to determination. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't alone anymore. Jason promised her he would handle everything, the threats, the investigation, the man behind it all. And this time she believed him. A week later, when Ava was finally discharged, Jason brought them both to his home, Lily running through the halls with wide eyes and Ava stepping slowly, cautiously, overwhelmed by the quiet beauty she hadn't seen in years. Jason showed Ava the room he had prepared for her as she recovered, and then the room he made for Lily, filled with books, toys, a bed shaped like a castle, and fairy lights twinkling like tiny stars. Lily's gasp of joy echoed through the home, and Ava watched her daughter with a grateful, emotional smile that made Jason's chest tighten. That evening, after Lily fell asleep clutching a stuffed bear Jason bought her, Ava stood by the window, watching snow fall softly over the city. Jason approached her slowly, unsure whether to speak or simply stand beside her. She turned to him before he could decide, her eyes full of everything she hadn't been able to say for years. "I thought I lost everything," she whispered. "But somehow, I still have you. And her." Jason cupped her cheek gently, brushing his thumb over her skin. "We're a family, Ava. We always were. We just lost each other for a while." Ava leaned into his touch, tears slipping silently down her cheeks, not from pain, but from the overwhelming relief of finally being safe, finally being seen, finally being home. Jason wrapped his arms around her carefully, pulling her close, and she rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady heartbeat she had once loved and feared she would never hear again. In the quiet glow of the living room, as snow drifted like feathers outside and the soft hum of the city filled the space, Jason, Ava, and Lily finally came together, not as broken pieces, not as shadows of a lost past, but as a family brought back from the edge. And for the first time in 5 years, the future felt bright.